Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone. How's it going? It's a short week this week. We had a holiday on, for those of you who are not in the United States, we had a holiday on Monday, and I just feel like it still feels like Wednesday to me right now. I'm flabbergasted. It's already Thursday, and it's already June. Oh my gosh. Holy smokes.
June.
This year is flying by.
June. Yeah, for real. Allergy season late.
Oh,
coming in hard.
Tell me about it.
Last couple of days have been
we had
pretty brutal for me.
We had a family incident around allergies are from me. I weakened the family blood with my allergies. So my poor son gets all kinds of allergies, and his eyes are just nonstop, like itchy and tears. And so he was rubbing his eye so hard, he got a corneal abrasion the other day.
Ooh.
Yeah. So we had to be like, tone it down there, bud. So he's on some antibiotic drops. Eyes are getting better, but man, I'm like, what the heck is happening? Never had that happen before. So anyways, allergy season is really bad this year. Awesome.
Everything's late. Is it just me? I mean, it looks like it's
You were late this
snowing at
morning,
our house.
this morning, Tommy. So yeah, I can see
The
that.
one time. I feel like it's been snowing at my house with some of the trees, just the pollen that's coming out. I'm like, my goodness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So over at a friend's house over the weekend, and he lives in like almost a forest, and it literally just looked like it was raining the entire time. And
not fun. Yeah, not fun.
Welcome to the allergy season channel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I think we're all indoor boys now, I believe, because of the computers. Like I say, I'm an indoor boy.
Right.
If I could bring my
city slicker
outside.
Like,
Yep, exactly right.
Back in the day, I used to like camping. Now I just bring an RV.
Now I just visit hotel rooms.
Yeah, right. We'll walk around the forest and then end up back at the hotel during the day.
Amazing. Any kind of openers? Anything you guys read or saw this week that was interesting? Want to kick out some stuff here?
Man. You know who I realized we haven't talked a lot about? A gentleman, Gerhard Bruckel.
Yeah.
Right. He's
amazing
been an MVP
stuff.
And for people in our space, I hope the name's familiar, but just one of the long time super solid rock star guys of business intelligence, right? Been around just as long as I think is, the Italians, but he had a blog that came out yesterday that I cannot wait to try. So what he's done is used field parameters to drive data and value language translation within the report.
Pretty cool concept.
It is. Like, I'm really interested in like walking through his blog and like trying it out with our environment, because it's not a small task. Like there have been blogs and articles out there how you do this within the models, but it's kind of a large effort, and I'm excited to dive in and take a deeper look to see if I can apply it in our area, because it's something that we need to do. And I just pasted in the side chat for
got it.
Those folks that are joining us live. But yeah, for sure, check out that article. Is one, Gerhard creates great content, and two, this one looks really interesting if you need to do any sort of translation within Power BI.
And not only is he amazing in his blog articles and his things around the periphery of Power BI, he's my go-to guy for anything Databricks related. He has built a couple actually data connectors.
Big
Databricks is his thing. Yeah. So he's heavily invested in Databricks, and he's even built a Databricks Visual Studio Code connector that he has made. So he's definitely all in the code space and very, very knowledgeable, super technical. Love his stuff. Thoroughly enjoyed it. So appreciate the effort. If you're listening or if you know of him, send him this intro for the podcast today and let him know we appreciate his wonderful contributions to the community and stuff. So thank you very much for your good articles.
Kudos to the Power BI community lately. The amount of, I have a bunch of RSS feeds and all that, and the amount of field parameter articles that I've been trying to save and then read has been immense, and just what people have been using them for.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's hard to keep up with how many people are writing about Power BI, but really writing great content too.
That's a general challenge, I think. Right? There's a general challenge, I think, about, when people there's not a good collected area for Power BI content where you could favorite things and kind of come back to something you want to look at later on. I got people on LinkedIn asking, can you tell us more about data marts? Tommy, maybe you want to, have you, so maybe we should very briefly, because I've been playing with it a little bit too since the feature came out. Tommy, have you been playing around with it? Seth, how about you?
Seth?
Not a chance yet.
Yeah, I started to dive in, and I know I had some big words on Tuesday about the equivalent to the iPhone. It's
more like
it's good.
It's more like a Samsung, maybe.
It's like an iPhone, but they forgot like the music part, like or the phone part. So I don't know. Like it's the idea is great, but they definitely, Seth, you talked about this. They always use this as the test, the test center, the beta testers. This feels very raw to me. Where trying to create measures is, I don't want to say difficult, but if I'm trying to import one of my data sets with very complex measures, this is exactly what I said on episode 1. You said the cloud was coming, and I said, yeah, and the experience is going to be terrible.
Yep.
And honestly, it is, because there's been a few times like I pasted in a long measure, but then I'm like, oh, I need to edit a few things, and then it just something happens, it moves, and then I'm out of the data mart. Wouldn't happen on so those kind of things right now are a little difficult. I really want the ability though, because right now it's just direct query when you try to connect to it, to be able to like connect to different tables or views, because it's really just Power BI data set in the cloud. That's really all it is right now.
Yes. So I see the potential for it to be more, honestly. I mean, I think
So do I, of right now, though.
I started playing with it this week. I was just trying to get around data marts and get my head around and just start adjusting, figuring things out for myself. Where does it make sense? Where do I like it? Where do I not like it? I do a lot of data sets where I build a data set in Power BI and then build a thin report. So that data model is the data set is very key to me for when I build for my building procedure, whatever my process, whatever you want to call it. I am very convinced though right now that I would like to use data marts to replace that experience, but I'm not sure it's there yet. And again, it's in public preview, so again, there's a lot of rough features around the edges. This is literally the hey, this is the minimum viable product we can get out the door for people to use it. And I think there's going to be a lot more in feature enhancements around it, because it totally makes sense. But to your point, Tommy, go ahead.
Sorry,
I was gonna say, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, a challenge question, right? Like,
sure.
To my viewpoint
Yep.
from the last episode when we were talking about data marts,
sure,
right? It definitely feels like a feature that could drastically change the landscape of how we do things 100%. In the future. And I equated it to how Power BI rolled out, right? Like, did it have all the enterprise features and all the bells and whistles that it does 5 years later? No
way.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess my challenge question to you, Tommy, is obviously we're not in a state where it's the full-fledged solution that you want to be using on a daily basis. It may get there, but from a generic Power BI user who doesn't know all of the back end in different systems, is it in a place that they can use it today?
Like I said, I would just create your data set in Power BI and publish that, and just make that a blank report, blank data set, because it does the same purpose to if you're trying to connect to a report, a data mart, or a Power BI data set, it's the same exact feature and functionality. So I would just get comfortable using Power BI desktop. It's definitely more of a more intuitive experience, is a better experience. So I honestly would say, why try to deal with the browser trying to create the measures when you can have a better interface trying to create DAX? From the relationship point of view, you have more features available in desktop, because the end result's exactly the same right now. So that's where I'm at right now. Again, I think it can explode into something that really does replace that, but it's not there yet.
So here's let me tell you, like, I'll give you a little flavor of like what I tried to get into for data marts, just very briefly before we get into our real topic of the day, because this is getting to be a good intro topic. I like this one actually a lot. So I've gone out, I've created a data mart. I made a data mart on top of a SharePoint list that I had laying around somewhere. So I grabbed that, pulled it in, made a measure, counted some stuff. things I don't like about it, or things that are struggling for me right now, is how I create measures, can't put them in folders. There's a
Oh
lot
my
of things
You
like it's supposed to be like modeling like a normal data model. And what I think is happening here is I think really a data mart is this join between it's the collection of now a SQL server and analysis services in kind of one user interface. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of measure related things that I don't have the ability to adjust or do or move, or those things bother me. Like I'm really picky about ordering and things on my model. Um,
Yeah.
I can't really do a whole bunch of other um, model level things that work well for me yet. So not there yet on that piece, on that front. I do really like though the interface. So there's some things that they've done really well is if you go into like the query editor or you edit a table, the editing of a table, I really like the experience of it. They give you like the graphical view at the
Mhm.
top. They have the table list on the left-hand side. You have the query settings on the right-hand side, and you can tell they're taking a lot of cues from what Data Flows is doing and bringing that here to this interface, which I
Yeah.
think is actually very strong. And I'd also think this is actually a pretty powerful tool now, because the way you can look at the M language and a table preview and how the data engineering looks is, segments
Right.
and merging really good. So that part, I think I can definitely see that this product has been born on the maturity of data flows. Because when data flows came out, I was like, can't use it, too slow,
Well,
nothing works. They've definitely improved that part of this, and you can see that they've incorporated it.
so this is
So
the other
so
problem.
we're gonna be
So
here's I still want to stick to this theme though, right? Like we're gonna be in this conversation tone of like it still doesn't do this thing that I do all the time. It still doesn't do this
Mm-hmm.
thing that like
Yep.
I as a BI professional need to do when I build model. Like we're gonna have that conversation, right? But I don't want to get stuck in that conversation, right?
Agreed.
I want
yeah,
to focus like how close, if it's not there yet, we know it's not there for the Uber enterprise user.
Yep.
What are the key features that are
Mhm.
missing for its intended purpose initially here, right? Which
Uh-huh.
is removing a lot of the complexity that we like to deal with on a daily basis because we like, you know, we know everything under the covers.
Yes.
What are the key things that are missing that need to get out there for it to streamline the business user experience?
Yeah, I do want to make a note. If I'm saying it's still raw, and I'm the guy who has every beta tool out there, Windows Insider. Like I love trying new things, and it's because
Yeah.
usually they have some features. And I'm saying not yet. I think really it's two
And
main
I'm saying,
fundamental. Yeah,
what are the specific
yeah,
not
yeah. And
yet?
obviously, the two main fundamental things that would make me really say I'm going to really begin
Mhm.
to put this in my workflows. One, the interface from the modeling point of view, creating DAX measures, organizing your columns, just making a clean model, like the data types, like all those little things that you want to do in prep beforehand is either very difficult or there's some bugs in it where you change something to currency, it goes to custom. So I would say that's my kind of
Okay.
first item. Two is the features available. What it should be is the features available on the endpoint. So if I'm connecting to a data mart,
Yes.
ish, that to me is where the fundamental part here is. Like I will deal with every bug in the interface. If I had, I think with the features I more imagine where it is kind of like I can import the table, or we talked about where it can almost serve as something you use in Power Automate or Power Apps, really being
Okay.
that interface. Right now, like I said, it's exactly a Power BI data set in the service that you connect to. It behaves exactly the same. There's obviously some changes, but to me, I would go through every trivial bug, and if I had more abilities there. So
Yeah,
Got
I
it.
would say
I could totally see, I can totally see the frustration around creating a DAX measure and just being like, okay, what is it doing? Like, can I see
and
that?
I'll deal
yeah.
with that if I had
Yeah.
more feature, like
Sure.
more. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd kind of agree with that. I think as well. I think I'd say so. One thing I did check out was trying to connect to the endpoint via Azure Data
Oh yeah,
Studio.
I did too.
So I try to thinking, okay, maybe the model's not all there, but if it's analysis services in the back end, I mean, I most of my editing that I do is all inside um, uh, Tabular Editor 3. That's what I do. So if you can put the model up, fine. I don't have folders. the UI doesn't have it, fine. These are minor
Right.
things in my
I'll
opinion,
deal with
right?
yeah.
I can deal with it. What I really need though is I need the ability to go into the SQL Server side. So, basically connect with
Mhm.
SSMS or Data Studio, create views and load tables or whatever I want to do there. I want to be able to use that. And then in addition to that, I also want to be able to use Tabular Editor 3, do my modeling. I'm fine with that because then I can create a measure, push the measure to the model, and then I can grab those measures and drop them on a pivot grid, which then I can see, okay, these dimensions, this measure. I can check I'm fine with that. Totally cool.
Right.
Can't quite get that working very well or reliably yet. So to me, I don't think this is ready for anything other than look at exists, play around with a bit, maybe make a data set, try it out a little bit, but I'm not sure I would put anything in production yet around this at this point. I would just kind of,
Right.
it's more like to me a novelty at this point. It's not ready enough to
Right.
even, I think you're going to be, if I'm talking, I'm projecting here a bit, but if I was talking to a new user who's been using this for like a month or a week, I think I would get a feedback of it's a little too buggy, it's not quite consistent enough, and it takes a little too long to load certain things through there yet. But I think it's a good starting point for where we're going to go to. So I'm confident that it's going to get better, like you said, Seth. But let's not argue about like, oh, it's not quite there yet. I agree. But there's definitely some clear. For me, there's some clear hooks that need to be solid for me to really adopt it and maybe move on to it.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces I'm having problems with here is where does the data come from? So now I feel like I'm getting a bit more in my head. I'm a little less clear about should I really be building a data flow first and then loading that transformed data directly into my data mart, or does the data mart do that for me with the data flow to get the data into the data mart?
Well,
and that's where I'm like, I don't know now.
All good questions, right? And I think of course some of that architectural recommendation stuff I'm sure is coming.
Yes.
It almost seems like the launch is it's not premature, right? What
No.
I would recommend is this. I think the clear consensus is data marts are very likely to change a lot of the things that we do.
Agreed.
Right now is a good time to start playing with that, get familiar with what their capabilities are and how to use them and get plugged in, because the more you know now, as they start to fix these feature gaps or these missing things and produce more documentation, and we get closer to GA, like start now and just kind of get along for the ride. Is it something you're going to implement automatically in your production workspace? Likely not.
No way.
Right.
You better not be implementing preview features in your production.
Get used to it. Right, get used to it, and we'll see where the ride takes us.
It's kind of like Michael Jordan at 10 years old. He's definitely going to change whatever they did, but he's not playing the big leagues yet. So
I also feel like I read something on a blog somewhere that said Power BI data marts are not charging you for preview. So
no.
So there is, and I don't know exactly what that means. There's also a recommendation of if you're turning on data marts, you should do it in premium per user, because that way
instead of premium, because
So so just some things I learned around that one. So that was good advice there for me. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So if you're playing with data marts, play with them in premium per user, because that's a specified capacity level of service that you're going to get. And if you have data marts on in a premium capacity, you will be absorbing capacity from your premium SKU that you won't be able to have for other things.
That's a really interesting and good point, right? Like typically, if you think about the preview features that are going to cost you money in Azure, like those are pretty locked down, right? Like you're the group, and when you know the pricing, you can turn it on and off.
Exactly right.
But if data marts is available to the entirety of your organization because premium's active, no, but think about this, like, and it's in preview and you're not getting charged for it, like what happens when they flip that switch? Are they going to say, hey, by the way, your usage is X amount and you're going to have to bump up your capacity when we go GA?
These are the things we're going to have to kind of be considerate of. So I think we have to be very
stay tuned.
Girls.
Man.
Stay tuned to a future episode of Explicit Measures where we discuss how bad it's going to be.
I owe Microsoft $10 million.
So Seth, I think these are great questions, and I think this is exactly why right now, and this is where I feel like to me, there's one major miss here on this one is you either turn on data marts for the entire organization, or you turn it on for none of the organization. Right now, today, in the admin settings, there's no ability for you to be able to turn it on just for a specific group of people, or even a specific set of user or resource or workspaces, whatever, right? I would like to think that turning on data marts for a set of users or workspaces would be an option we should be able to set at some point. That way, I don't have to come back as an admin and, 3 months from now when stuff starts going a little bit more GA related and start saying, okay, I got to go kill all these things that people are now relying on.
I do agree that I think the enablement should have come the same way with the admins, where you can specify which groups it's enabled
100%.
for. Because the only option we really do have right now is PPU, like you said.
Yep.
To vet it.
Yep, exactly right. And even then, I would almost argue, like, if you're going to vet this stuff, I mean, because you can't turn it on or off, you might be standing up your own Power BI tenant somewhere else, right? Trying to start something else separately so that you can actually, keep it away from your normal your main environment, your main tenant. Anyways,
all right,
well,
successfully derailed by the comments on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
congratulations, Saeed.
It's all right. I'm cool with it. It was good. Good question. I hope that kind of rounded out some ideas or thoughts around data marts, how that worked for everyone. So thank you for the question. I think it was Saeed. Appreciate your question on that one. Hopefully that gave you some feedback there around what our thoughts on around data marts are. So stay tuned. We'll have more thoughts for sure. This might be a recurring theme for every intro for the next couple of weeks.
What are we talking about today?
Today's topic is going to be kind of around looking at forecasting or doing forecasting things inside Power BI. So I guess the technical topic here is: do we need more forecasting? And I'd like to start exploring what that looks like inside of your Power BI reports. So yeah, Seth, let's kick it off here. Set some of the stage. Do you guys use forecasting? Where does forecasting fit in your organization?
Yeah, I think I'll set a minimal stage and kick it back to one of you guys. I personally am not using it in the spaces that we are heavily involved in on a daily basis.
Yep.
I know our finance team is, but no practical real term right now.
Yeah.
In the past experiences, tons of it. Right.
Yes.
Especially when you're working with finance group or certain analysts, planning groups, where your ordering is based on past and forecasted future of where you think business is going to be.
Yep.
To make sure that your business is operating at peak performance or efficiency. Lots of use cases in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a good tee up, Mike.
No, it's good.
If we want to back it up and, hey, Tommy, you got any use cases? Why don't you set up the topic for us?
Well, that's a good starting point. I mean, so let's go over. Tommy. So finance space, I think for sure I've seen some forecasting there. Tommy, are you guys using forecasting? Are you doing projects right now that are around that today?
Well, obviously that's kind of the crux of the conversation, where there's so many features in Power BI to do the advanced analytics, and the forecasting has been around almost since Power BI Designer, like from the line chart using the seasonality forecasting.
Yep.
But honestly, I really don't see a lot of people utilizing that feature at all. And maybe it's cool to show, but no one's actually making a decision off of that or saying, oh no, our forecast is up or down based on that built-in feature.
So are we talking built-in feature or just forecasting in general?
In general.
So
I would agree with that. I see more custom implementations to understand the forecast in visuals, as opposed to businesses making heavy decisions on the built-in feature.
Right.
And
but
so before we go down, I think too far, I think you're going into a very technical space initially here about where is it working and maybe where is it good. I would maybe almost just let's take a cursory look at where in Power BI can you add forecasting. And so I think there's kind of different levels here of what we're talking about for forecasting, and I'll give you some of where I think the weaknesses of the out of the box forecasting come from Power BI desktop alone. So first one that I'm aware of, and again, you guys fill me in here if I miss some stuff here. One of the forecasting areas, you can go into a line chart And in the line chart, you can then click on the forecasting option there. So that's one of the forecasting areas that you can produce on. And then I believe that forecasting option in there's like a whole section for like adding a forecast. It allows you to add, it's like an ARIMA. There's a forecasting algorithm that you can kind of use. It adds seasonality. So if you want to look at like, hey, if you have data by month, by data points, you could do every 12 months, we're going to have some sort of cyclical seasonality. So it's using 12 data points as a reference point for what seasonality looks like. In our podcast or things on our website, we have this very clear seasonality of 7 days, right? The weekends clearly dip versus during the middle of the week when people are at work, they're listening, they're engaging with the website. So for us, there would be like a seasonality for our website around roughly the 7 days. So that's one thing of forecasting that I'm aware of. I don't know if you would call this forecasting. This is another kind of data science thing that I think I would kind of lump it in as like intelligence around your data would be kind of like the anomaly detection. So yes, it's not directly forecasting, but at least it's helping me identify, based on some data points, where is a single data point falling outside the norm. And I think some people maybe get a little wrapped around the axle when you start talking about forecasting. Sometimes you can just use brute force statistics to help you figure things out. And I think that's what anomaly detection is doing. It's looking at a series of data points historically and saying, does this data point fall outside of a standard range of data points? And I think that's actually, I mean, from my opinion, that's pretty impactful, because a lot of times when I was in the business side of things working on reports, no one knew when to yell, hey, I got a problem. Like any little dip that would happen on any little chart, like we're down 10% on sales or whatever, everyone freaks out. They're like, it's a problem. Okay, is it 10% every time this year when we do? And so like there's I remember there's always like this hyper focus from my standpoint. Everyone like freak out. All the leadership would be like, I think this is a problem. We're going down. Like we need to course correct, which they should be, right? I mean that's
right.
But is it just normal?
It's a hole in the ship.
Yeah, but I mean, if we expect everything to come on if we expect all of our data or all of our sales to be this nice, even, smooth line all the time, we can't expect that. So there's the law of like large numbers, right? The more data points you have, you're gonna have some sort of noise in it. And so are we freaking out in the noise in the data, or are we actually really needing to make a decision on something that's really happening, like a really bad thing that happened or occurred? So
the use case of like avoiding the really bad thing, I think is valid. But the other point to that though is, if you don't, in some use cases where if you don't have visibility into the past and future, like you miss big sales opportunities, right? Because if you don't predict the spike that always comes around, Mike, your point, like a seasonal point or whatever, you run out of stock. Like what is the amount of sales that you missed, in those ranges? That is where I think forecasting in terms of like the making the money kind of thing comes in, because you don't have that visibility. So as you start to analyze those data sets, from a historical perspective, statistically look at all those anomalies or whatnot, that certainly has a big impact. And I've seen, in organizations for sure, using forecasting as far as like ramping up in production to meet better goals during those timeframes.
That's
And honestly,
really good use case right there. I really like that one a lot, actually.
I think
people underestimate the opportunity of missed sales, right? Sales were there, but sales, you didn't get what you wanted. Right. So again, this is where like this whole business thing is such an animal. It's like this really hard. It's hard to nail. It's not a rule based system. It's not, do this then this works, right? If you run out of materials, sales go down. So what's the root cause of why sales are down? Was it because we couldn't have people actually wanting to buy stuff, or we have not enough stock to do? Like there's all these other extra things that are going on here that you have to analyze.
And this is kind of, again, I'll go back to like the curse of Power BI and the ability just to add a lot of visuals. It's actually harder to do forecasting in Power BI than it was in Excel. Like I feel like I built a lot more. Granted, it was not scalable, but we did a lot more, not necessarily like 3 months out or 6 months out, but those little tweaks, like, hey, if we change cost here, based just doing some rolling averages, doing some basic run rates, that honestly I don't see it in a lot of other reports, and I don't, because it is more difficult to do in DAX. The other part too, like the miss
I'd
sales,
agree.
right? Well, there's all of those other attributes now. You can't just work on a given, cell. It's that column by column basis. So it's a lot harder to have that ability from that anomaly point of view. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why Power BI built it in. But again, there's not a lot of explicit measures or calculations coming out. The other thing we didn't talk about is there's a whole other feature, the what if parameter, that I really don't see anybody talking about. And I don't know if people, it's not just that the feature's there, right? And I think my big thing is, what are people relying on? Obviously the seasonal, where we're going to be 6 months, but there's more to forecasting than that. A lot of my reports, like I said, it's very much like that historical trend, year to date with previous year, and if there's no goal or objective, like, then it's, what are you going to forecast, right? And maybe we're not asking the right questions. But what are those little things that we should be able to add? I honestly have really tried to use all the pre-built features in Power BI, like the automated insights, the line chart. But again, it's neat to see, but I'm not going to use that to make a decision or communicate to, our chief executive, hey, we're looking like we're going to miss our target based on what? Like, oh, the seasonal algorithm Microsoft thought for Power View, like, and so we're not defining it enough.
And another thing you want to measure, particularly when you're doing forecasting of things, is you want to measure your forecast against what actually happened, right?
Yeah, and that it becomes very difficult.
Yeah. So
Right. Yeah.
the algorithm that you run, and I think this is something that's a bit unknown to people, or maybe people who haven't done it as much. The algorithm's always working as efficient as it possibly can. The algorithm is what it is. You can throw additional data at it, and if you use like more machine learning based things, yes, you can add some more features to it. Yes, you can do some hyperparameterization of these different forecasting models if you wanted to. There's things you can do there that will help it, but at the end of the day, the data or the forecasting is only as good as the data you provide it. And so what you read on articles around data science is, if you want better forecasting, have better data. That's like where the lemon is mostly from. You get the best squeeze from that lemon, right? That's where you get a lot of rich insights from having a better quality data. So where I recommend, when people ask like, well, it's not doing a great job. Well, spend more time making better data. That will definitely improve your forecasting. And then, you have these other formulas or characters. Like, there's this thing called a MAPE. I can't remember the acronym for it, but I remember the name sticks in my mind. Mean average percent error or something like that I think is what it's calling out. But the MAPE is allowing you to then evaluate. Okay, you forecasted 10 million. Did you get there? How far off were you? Is your forecasting even accurate based on what you've done historically? And I think that's another good measure when you really get into forecasting, because you want to know, is the algorithm we're picking, is that a good one? Is it actually representative of our data or not? And that's what Power BI doesn't give you out of the box for their standard algorithms.
Well, it's not just that, and I think you might have just answered my question from the initial thought of the topic, but where even if you create your explicit forecast and you do the correlation, well, as soon as the data refreshes, whatever that forecast was is going to dynamically change. And you're not going to basically measure against what the forecast was at the beginning of the month, because again, it's always reflecting the refreshed data.
Yep.
This is why
Mm.
again, back in the day, we utilize Excel, because you would just have this cell that would always stay the same, like, okay, this percentage, copy the value, and we could always see how close we get to what we initially thought.
Yes.
That
See, and that's
proves
where
impossible.
Correct.
that's also where I think the out of the box forecasting feature falls a little bit short,
Mm-hmm.
because it's always dynamically ahead, and
Correct.
you don't get to see where the line was, right?
Correct.
You
Right.
made decision points based on a forecast that you still want to see the forecast line,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how close we made adjustments at these points based on the forecast, right? Like, I still want to see what that was when reality comes, right? Because
Yes.
ultimately, whatever the use case, like, this is all about kind of anticipating change, right? In an organizational unit, whether
Correct.
that's, finance, planning, marketing, whatever, or the organization holistically, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's about trying to be proactive, and that's why I think the value behind forecasting is being
Yes.
making eliciting proactive discussions around particular areas instead of
Hmm.
being reactive
I
because
like
it's
that.
only current state data that you're seeing and reporting.
Yes. And
But again,
I'll
yeah,
put
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think this conversation with forecasting fits very well with what we've talked about previously around goals or having goals to do things, right? So just putting data on a page and looking at historical reporting information is okay to a degree. And I think there's this concept. I mean, I saw it all the time in the business. The company would make goals. We would march towards those goals, and for whatever reason, those goals always kept moving. That you get close to the goal. Like if you exceeded your goal a month before the end of the goal, we add another goal. We improve. Like, hey, you did good. You got to
Right.
you got to your mark. Let's add another whatever we're gonna do to sales or numbers or whatever. And if groups of the business didn't meet their goals, what we found happening was the goals would change so they could meet their goals. Like if you're having like supply chain was
Hmm.
notorious for this. We're gonna have a fill rate of this. Well, here's why it didn't work. We ran out of this, and we're not gonna count those because this is this, and this is. There's all these like reasonings, and so that way they can make their metrics or their numbers. And there wasn't. It was muddying the water around what the true metrics were doing. The goals were adjusting. So having a moving target sometimes was just very difficult to hit.
It's yeah, and I, I really love where this is going, but now I just got to solve a problem here where and that's on the roadmap too. They talked about a build where you can actually add like additional targets based on date.
Hmm?
So we'll be able to see that difference like over time because again,
Yes.
we lose that every time our report's refreshed. The only way
Yes.
to do that now is to do a scheduled email. But we can't that's where I think at least for me I would be able to, in a sense, create little additional forecasts or projections in my Excel files because, like I say, we were always within 3%. If we just changed, you could do those tweaks in an
Hmm.
Excel file, which again, it's impossible to do right now. You'd have to, in a sense, do some add to a table every day. But it's almost like we need like a dynamic static measure or dynamic static values in Power BI where you have like a projection that is relative to filters or the date, but once the day is over that will always stay the same,
I'm gonna be a jerk.
right?
I'm gonna be a jerk here, Tommy. I
Yeah, but go
think
ahead.
I think what you're looking for is a data mart that could accept data from something, and you would capture it back in there. So I mean, that would
That
be.
does sound like a great idea.
I mean, that to me that would be like one of those good things. Like so, Power BI itself can't hold input records or fields of
But
data, right? And so
yeah,
what we want to do, I mean, to your point, exactly 100%, Tommy. Like what we want to do is we want to have this dynamic thing, right? There's definitely going to be a goal. Like no argument there. But how are we tracking that goal? And to your point, Tommy, earlier about like the goals are now called metrics feature of PowerBI.com. If you have a goal of what number of sales or 80% of whatever, like whatever that number is, I not only need to track the actual data point marching towards that number, I also need to track what the goal was at various points in time. And again, I don't care if the goal changes. This is not my argument. My
I
argument
just need
is
to
I just
see.
need to know when it does change and why did it change.
Right.
To me, and that would be really nice if you could then have all this goals information repopulating itself back into this data mart, and maybe again, I'm totally speculating at this point. This is totally wild speculation. But imagine the day where we could actually have input fields from Power BI writing themselves back into the data mart for some reason. If we structured a table in a way that would let us write back to the data mart, which now is part of the model, which now can be auto refreshed because it's all kind of this own contained environment thing.
Right.
So there could be a lot of power there in that.
And that's where we
Microsoft,
lose our
you need to build this. You need to build a
please.
write back
That
from Power
yeah.
BI reports to the data marts.
Well, and that's where we lose that insight where again, if I create a complex measure in DAX, I don't see how accurate that was over time and then be able to tweak that.
Yes.
Where
Right.
I want that measure to be in a sense on a table, just like you would do in Excel, where if I had created this complex calculation, I could see that historically over time, in a sense, maybe in a view in a data mart. In Excel, you could always see like, okay, we were always 3% off, etc. Over that time. You can we lose that ability to see that, which I think really dictates what we try to forecast or try to project, because we're kind of lost in the dark. We only know what we know of a certain date.
Yeah, I agree with
I need
this a
to
lot.
solve this though.
Well, I mean, here's where I think. Well, so we've kind of talked about like the in the box forecasting. I'm not aware of any other standard visuals that produce forecasting other than the line chart, because the line chart is kind of this time bound chart that gives you standard forecasting.
Right.
But what I will say is Power BI allows you to extend forecasting to other places. So other places you can add forecasting technology around is R and Python. So this is again kind of one of these more like,
Yeah.
another layer deeper here is if you're getting closer to whatever that forecasting stuff is doing, you can do, and there's two places you could do it. You could do R or Python forecasting inside a visual, because you could add the libraries in a R or Python visual on the report canvas, or you could step back and say, actually, I want to do R and Python inside Power Query. So you could also use R and Python there. So there's actually two options for you to go about this. If you wanted to store data or run computational things inside a data frame, you could do that in Power Query and have those numbers produced and then graphically show them with standard Power BI visuals. So that's one, you can do that option. Or you can then just grab the measures and dimensions, or the dimensions and the calculations, and put them on a visual. And inside that visual, then you could run the whatever kind of formula or forecasting algorithm you wanted inside Power BI Desktop on the Canvas side. So those are the only other two. Those are the only two places I'm really aware of forecasting. Tommy, are you aware of anything else that I missed? I mean, there's probably some. I know there are some custom visuals on the store that actually do forecasting. They're like forecasting visuals, custom visuals,
Yeah.
but they're all just using like Python and R. I don't think anyone's writing custom algorithms in custom visuals at this
Right.
point. At least I
But
haven't seen
again,
any.
even with R and Python though, you lose that insight from that historical view once the data refreshes. Right?
I don't know though. I mean, can you use Python and R inside like a data flow, or can you like write stuff out to a consistent space where you can kind of see that every time it incrementally refreshes? I don't know.
That
Well,
I do know.
I don't know, but here's what I would say though. Now that you guys have been talking about this has triggered a thought in my mind. Forecasting is like a slowly changing dimension.
Right.
I'll let that sink.
Yes.
So
Ooh.
if you think about it, so a slowly changing dimension is something that continually changes over time. And if you think about it, Michael, you're real smart. Think about it. I think about it. So if you think about what you're doing there, right? Realistically, what I think we're doing at some point is every day I should probably, or multiple times, I don't know, every day I should be rerunning the forecast and seeing how that adjusts based on the past information. And this is also where I think doing forecasting outside of the realm of Power BI is probably more impactful, because I want to be able to evaluate, okay, I did a forecast on, June 1st. I want to run all the data through June, and then I want to go back and say, okay, what did the forecast look like on June 1st compared to what we actually did? How good was that? And what can we do to improve the forecasting for, July, right? If we're doing July now, what would we change? Are there other additional features we would add? Would we clean out some data? Would we correct some data? Like, is there actually bad data coming in that we weren't able to catch, and we need to
But this has been my point. This has been my point every time this conversation's come up in multiple organizations, right? Like it brings to light the power that we have in Power BI, where you're producing current state data, right? Like current time evaluated data as of the last refresh, which can be extremely powerful, right? We have measures that show you aggregated fields, but the majority of the time, all of that data is okay to be current state, right? When we talk about forecasting, it like there might be value in seeing current state to make a decision, but then what we're talking about is immediately after that, we're talking retroactively. How, like, we made a decision based on the forecast at that was a point in time. What was the ramification of that decision? Or did that adjust things? Or as we move along, how is the forecast changing? All of those are data points that you have to have in the back end, because you want to analyze over time, are you making the best decisions? And the only way to do that is by capturing that along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you I think I've gotten into the discussions where no, it's probably better that we store this alongside the actuals, because then we understand as we're looking at things going forward, did we make the best decision when we were, when we dealt with this, or did we miss something when we were making planning or doing these
Yeah.
things, right? And you can't do that in a retroactive way unless you're capturing the state of the forecast as
Yes.
you go through time.
Exactly right. I would 100% agree with that one. It's the state and time. I think that it's key here, right? Because it's always adjusting, and again, forecasting is like a slowly changing dimension, right? It is continually adjusting, and it is always kind of fluid and changing. And I feel like a lot of this is,
Well, I mean, you hope your slowly changing dimension is
yeah,
not changing that often, but
that's
That's
true.
right.
Well,
we
true.
account for it.
Well, I mean, if you think about it too, like, the Power BI version of a forecast is, it forecasts everything as a lump sum, right? It's looking, so if you look at like the line chart for Power BI, if you had all sales for all regions, it's just going to forecast all sales, all regions. And the nice part
Right.
is if you used slicers on the report page, it could drill down to a single region and provide a forecast for the single region, but you can't reevaluate it. I can't compare that. It's not what it's not doing. It's not forecasting down to some subset of information and then aggregating that data back up to the top. So to me, there's that lost area around forecasting. And so my preference is, yeah, I'll use forecasting a little bit here. I think for finance and some teams where it's easier for them to use the algorithm that's there on some general stuff, I think that's totally fine. But what I would say is if you're
Well, it's
really
exploratory. I think there's a very
agreed,
good use case for
I
exploration
like
in
that.
data.
Yes.
Maybe less as we get serious into, making big decisions
And so
based on ordering.
And then that's exactly where I think I would go, right? So when we're starting talking to big decisions, let's really talk about what real forecasting looks like. And I've also talked to companies as well around, machine learning and data science of these things, right? I don't think every company needs a dedicated data scientist to do all these things anymore. I think you borrow data scientists. Honestly, I think you come in with a hard problem and say
rent them out.
Rent them out. I mean, they get bored. I mean, every data scientist that I've worked with or I've been in companies, they come into the company, they solve the hard thing, and then the company runs out of projects. And maybe some companies have a lot more data science and data things for them to continually stay busy with. But like, yeah, there's probably less companies are needing like the full-time data scientist person. And if you had a very strong data engineer working with a data scientist for a period of time, you can get those data engineers to maintain those models that are required or being built by the data scientist. And then, every 6 months, a year, you re-engage for like another month of effort around, okay, here's our next big challenge. Come in, data scientist, let's figure out this next problem. Because again, 70% of all these kind of projects are just cleaning data, right? Get the data science to come in and tell you how to clean your data. What do I need to do to make this clean and nice and ready to go for you? And then, okay, go away. Let me play with this data for like the next 3 months while I start cleaning it, finessing it. And then, okay, now that we think we've got some cleaner data, come back in and start playing with it and tell me what's really happening here with the data.
I think the biggest thing too is like, yeah, we can do from the data science point of view, but that ability to capture a state of time that I think we're more accustomed to with, we'll say, static data, or if you are pulling an R, right, where you can basically get a subset of the data and store it as a variable, and kind of do your forecasting on that. That's really difficult to do in DAX. Like DAX really wasn't meant for that. Like just to do like, give me the previous 3 months and the 3 months before that. That's not a fun thing like that. That's not a out of the box thing, where in R or in Excel, that's pretty darn simple to do, where I think a lot of those, again, we don't have to have the perfect forecast, but just to have that here's little variables that we can change. Really, DAX wasn't meant for that. And I think that's where I would love to see either that ability to, again, either in the data mart or kind of collect subsets of data to be basically my forecasting models.
There you go. Have
Where I go?
a forecasting plugin feature for the data mart.
It's already in data flows, right? So
AI, use your AI on a data set, man.
Yep.
Right.
Well,
like throw a data set at it, give it some criteria,
make it and have it.
Give me a new column on my
make a table.
My data.
Make a table of data and stick it here, and then update that forecast every month, and then it gets you again. You get your slowly changing dimension things. I think. But again, this is where I think you can add more capabilities. I mean, SQL Server has the ability of handling and tracking slowly changing dimensions for you,
right?
And historically tracking those things as well. So, like, I think there's features that you can add in there from SQL Server that would be really helpful inside that data mart area. I'm actually, I was, believe it or not, I was playing around with, as we speak here. I'm playing around with data marts, trying to check something out here.
I'm glad you're keyed into the conversation.
Well,
Mike. Appreciate it.
I think this is funny though, because what I was looking for, someone asked a question, I was trying to answer the question online. I accidentally clicked on add a data flow in my workspace that already has a data mart, and as soon as I clicked data flow, a pop-up window came up and says, "Hey, do you want to build a data mart in preview instead of your data flow?" And I thought,
and the yellow button says, "Yeah, let me do that."
Yeah,
it's like almost hidden to say, "I want your data flows."
They're now trying to move you even away from doing. So they want to. I think if I'm reading this right, they want you to ditch data flows altogether and just go with data marts.
I don't know.
Man,
there's got to be a distinction. There's got to be a distinction in use cases. Otherwise, they'd be like, "Hey, when we roll this out to GA, we're deprecating this."
Dude,
I
don't see that.
GA may be 3 years away, so
who knows how long it's going to take to get there. But man, that scares me right there, because that's going to be like, holy smokes.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting.
That's your task. Your task to clarify that what the difference is in the next opener.
Yes.
What is the distinction between data flows and data marts?
I think,
and also
there's got to be one. Otherwise, that'll be an interesting opener.
I mean, I definitely think, yeah. We'll come back to that. I mean,
there's a lot of crossover. I get it, right? But there's got to be a use case for that. Would be interesting.
There's actually a great article where he actually used not our memes, but the one from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's basically saying like data marts, data flows. What is all the difference of all of them? And it's the guy with the red eyes looking at the chart, which is like, yeah, there's a lot of different products right now that we may not know all the use cases right now. Like, where does it actually fit in the ecosystem?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is one of those things that it's one of the features that is disruptive, right? To its own ecosystem, that we got to sort some things out, which is okay. We'll figure it out. Then we'll have another podcast on it.
Okay.
Like, hey, we solved the problem.
Okay, so I guess the biggest thing, if a lot of the features we're talking about from the forecasting point of view, I think it's interesting though too. We didn't talk a lot about the, like, basically maybe us trying to ask the right questions, or in a sense like getting not dictated what we should forecast on, but getting that from the requirements. Where finance, they usually have that, their basic data set has a budget, or forecast and actuals. Like, they're kind of built on that. So obviously that's much easier, but should it be our job or part of the data culture for us to kind of say, like, to kind of work that in somehow? Like, what is your thresholds?
I think your job, Tommy, would have been to forecast when you were going to ask that question in the time frame of this podcast, because we have 5 minutes left, but we can address as much as possible.
Sure, yeah. I think we got time. Well, we did.
Let's squeeze it in. Let's talk about the setup of forecast. How do you define that in the initial conversations?
This is one where I feel like I would only show them the feature exists. And this is, to your point earlier, Seth, I think I would point this one more towards, like, this is a self-discovery mode, right? This is just looking at, based on the historical information you've selected, what is trending a direction or not. I think if you want deeper analysis, you're not gonna want to do the standard out of the box forecasting stuff that Power BI provides you. It's just not, to me, it's just not robust enough to track it, check it. I believe you, in the past, I think you could actually create a forecast, and then you could export data from that visual, and the forecasting data points would come with it. But that's a really not good experience, be able to have to, like, click on some settings on the page, produce the forecast and then export it every single time just to capture the state and time of that forecast.
But then you'd have to marry it up to your data set in the back end
Yeah,
again, and
no,
it's
it
like
doesn't.
not gonna happen, right? So I think for demo purposes, right? Like if
Shows
somebody's
well.
never seen how you would use forecasting in their
Agreed.
certain use case, be like, hey, okay, what, right? So add the forecast. This is what it would look like on a line chart. I would, this would be a dashed line. This would be a solid line. Like walking through
Yeah, I agree.
makes sense to me by
Mhm.
using that feature. Or if you're an analyst and you're, you know, trying to understand what, or playing around with forecasts of data to, align with, hey, like you're validating, maybe you could use it to validate the forecast that's actually, being
Yes.
presented by a different group or something like that. But I just, for the use cases, the write back part is problematic to just use that alone
Correct.
in a production setting for me.
Agreed. I would agree with that. And that's where I would go. I'd go to. I mean, again, I'm thinking more of like the other than a showy feature or other than like a rough swag. You're kind of taking that little like, do we feel like we're in the like,
Right.
are we going the right way? Like, there's stuff in trending of data that may or may not make sense. One thing I would recommend is if anyone's doing like seasonality or has a seasonal type business, doing things like 52 weeks rolling of total sales. That number doesn't really make sense. But when you look at that number, 52 weeks rolling, there's these really long trends that I start to appear. Are we going up? Are we going down? What's happening? Those are the kind of things that I like looking at from a very high level view of the world on your data, which actually I think make a lot of sense there as well. But I even argue like a good handful of visuals that are really being articulate about where your business is going might be more impactful than using the forecast feature, right? Maybe a unique way of using a scatter chart and identifying, changes in your data, right? Comparing, categories against each other over time. There's actually a really interesting chart that you can actually have a scatter chart with a play axis, and then it will actually plot the data points of like as the circle moves around the chart. I think Microsoft just did that one in their Gartner test. I guess they just did Gartner for 2022. They had a really cool chart that did that. So little things like that, I think, yes, yeah, maybe we can see some forecasting things, but I think really it's, it's being the reason the forecasting is there is to identify of all my data. Here's the 3 categories that were way below performance. We're trying to identify, pick out the anomalies, pick out the stuff that's like way off base, and correct for those things. I don't know. That's just my opinion. What do you think, Tommy?
Man, I was thinking that this conversation would be like, yeah, an hour would be good, but this is one of those that I feel like we'll take it offline. It's further to think about.
We'll
I think
argue more
I just
about it
want
later on.
we'll argue more about it. Half the stuff we talked about is not necessarily available right off the bat, and I think that's where I'm not getting upset, but I'm struggling with. There's got to be a way to do that, or at least do some way to try to catalog that information. Because if it's not available now in DAX, or in a sense, an incredibly complex method of going about it, how could I easily add just some basic classification, just some basic um, insights that are not just historical for a user, without having to, create a whole other data model and create a data flow that's unique of everything. But I think too is also starting with the user, where asking them the right questions, and we've talked about this a bunch, but obviously if might not have like a goal, like we're trying to get 25 leads, but are there thresholds? Would you be upset if, this particular metric was, down 50%? Would that cause concern? Just trying to understand where their alerts are, and then at least having, again, some context on each measure itself, which usually how I went about it with Excel, to just starting with asking the right questions.
And again, I would probably echo like, depending on a couple of those initial questions, I think should push you towards, yes, we can allow you to forecast your own things in a visual. I mean, I think it's us as the BI professionals. It's up to us to provide. Here's the limitations of what you're deciding on. Look, this
Right.
feature exists. Here's where it may fit your use case. Take it for what you will, and then at least having the ability to have. I mean, again, we we want to provide options. So our other option is, okay, if you don't want this, if these limitations are unacceptable to you, then we have to produce like an entirely separate something else that's going to go get data from the model and produce these forecasts in some other system that's going to give you that more robust capability around projecting and moving things forward for that data, capturing it, storing it, making that forecast like that slowly changing dimension.
Right, because we don't want to just do forecasting for the sake of forecasting. We're
Nope.
usually it's trying to make someone either, spend more money or push back on their budget. So, and like I said, I think that, yeah,
you don't want to throw good money after bad, right? I mean,
right.
this is also too, like, you also have to take the forecasting with a grain of salt to some degree. I think at some level, right? Yes, you can use it, you can start relying on it, but like until you've proven it out, until you have things like the MAPE, the mean average mean percentage. What did I call it earlier? I was looking that up. Mean absolute percent error.
Yeah.
If you have something like that can actually evaluate how accurate your forecast is, now you can start relying on it, right? If you do the forecast multiple times and you can keep running it and it's proving out to be fairly accurate, great. That's what you can use, but there is no way of proving out the MAPE on an existing Power BI report with a forecast on top of it. So that's where I struggle. Anyways, I think we've done it. I think we've burned through an adequate hour of time talking about forecasting, and again, a lot about data marts, because we enjoy that so much. Anyways, our only request, if you found some value from the podcast, if you really enjoyed what we were talking about, please go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell. It really helps us out. If you liked the podcast or this one particularly, maybe triggered some good thoughts, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It actually really helps our numbers. It helps get it helps the algorithm figure out more people like what we're doing. So we really appreciate it if you do that, and share it with one other person. If there's somebody else that you think would love this or want to talk to forecasting, or you've had these kind of conversations before, I recommend you share it out on one of the social platforms. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere. They are available on Apple and Spotify. Please leave us a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you are listening right now, join the conversation live. Join us every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 a.m. Central.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.